Let's start that again because everybody was talking. Let's start that again. Yeah, just let me give you a heads up, Brian. Just give me. Are they ready? The tape? Yeah. Okay. Let me know. Go ahead. All right, it is time for a Miami Sports Pod. Yes, we have a name finally. Last week we were the podcast to be named later, or something to that effect. Will Manso, Clay Farrow, Dookie Lang here for Local 10 Sports. And guys, week 2 of our podcast. Are you happy with the name?
I think it's better to have a name. It was like, I had a son 6 months ago, and we went back and forth on first names, middle names. There was a lot of debate, but when we finally pulled the trigger, finally named the kid, we had a name.
Well, we have a name now. Miami Sports Pod it is, Clay. So I'm happy. I feel okay.
I'm glad we've got one. I really liked where there's a Will, there's a Clay.
I did too. Our boss wasn't as excited about it, but that'll be like the sub name to it, where there's a Will, there's a Clay.
I like that.
And there's also a Dookie Lang, and there's also a topic of conversation today. You know, last week we talked a lot about the Heat. For those that didn't listen in, we're going to try to focus on some different things locally. Last week it was easy to talk about the Heat. They were in the middle of a long winning streak. By the way, the Heat are still playing well, having that crazy win that they got the other night to finish it off in Charlotte. But when you look right now at what we're going to talk about, this particular Miami Sports Pod is going to be called 3 South Florida Stars. How much longer will they be here?
Wow, wait, Dookie Lang, Will Manso, and me? You're including
we're gonna
3
break
stars?
Let me tell you something. If this were Star Trek, if we beamed up, guess which one of us would be the one who would be in jeopardy? It wouldn't be the two whose pictures are on the sports pod.
Breaking news, this might be your last one, so make it good. But here's what we're going to do.
I feel that way.
We're going to talk about these 3 stars, and the 3 stars we're going to discuss are Hassan Whiteside, Jarvis Landry, and Christian Yelich. Now, they may not be superstars nationally. They may not be in that upper echelon. But in South Florida, when it comes down to it, you look at the Heat, Goran Dragic is obviously a special player, but Hassan is the highest paid. When you look at the Dolphins, Ryan Tannehill was hurt this year. Who's the guy you look at? Yeah, Ndamukong Suh, Cam Wake, but Jarvis Landry kind of is that heart and soul. And when you look at the Marlins, what's left of them is Christian Yelich. So these are 3 guys, though, Clay, that their futures all kind of came into question this week for different reasons. Let's go one by one why, and then we can discuss further about what their future looks like. Let's start with Hassan Whiteside. No one on the Heat is talking about trading Hassan or moving Hassan or whether he's part of the future. But the fact is, he doesn't play much in fourth quarters and his closes. And I think that opens the eyes to a lot of people wondering, is he really a core piece for the Miami Heat, or will they move him if they have the opportunity?
Well, I think it all, as with anything else, it depends on the offer. And if we get to a point near the trade deadline where someone calls up Pat Riley and says, all right, I want to deal you a star, or Pat Riley is looking around and there is a star available, and whoever they happen to talk to says, all right, but we want Hassan Whiteside in return, then yes, I think he could ultimately get dealt. They're not going to deal him just for the sake of dealing him. Mm-hmm. So there is still a lot of value with Hassan. But he's not one of those players that you're going to look at and say, all right, he is absolutely untradeable. And I think that's why people are talking about him.
And especially when he doesn't play in those key moments, and they won 9-11 entering this new week. They're playing good basketball. They're the 4th seed in the East. But then that leads me to this, Dookie, is, okay, so if he is a guy that you could question whether he is part of the finishes, part of the core, like you just said, Clay, he gets, you get an offer for him. If you're a true superstar and a true core player for a franchise, you're not listening to offers because that is the person that you're building around with other guys. If we are to believe what Clay's saying, which, by the way, Clay, I agree with you, well, then the Heat must not think Hassan is truly that core piece long term, right? Because you wouldn't trade him if you thought he was.
I think back to when the Heat signed Hassan to his $98 million contract. And I'm not talking about his $98 million lot. I'm just talking about how Heat fans were feeling at the time. And the thought was, oh my goodness, Dwayne Wade is going to leave. We have to keep someone. Someone needs to be a core player who can be here for the Miami Heat, who they can build around. It's very hard now, fast forward to today, where you see Hassan in a win at Charlotte playing 0.2 seconds of the fourth quarter. 0.2. He put his hands up on an inbound pass and having games where he doesn't play the final 17 minutes. to ask, is this someone who you're going to build around for the playoffs? Is this someone who you're going to build around for the future? I mean, when he's out there, and Will, you talk about this a lot, you watch these games very closely, how teams go small against the Heat. So when the Heat go small, Hassan becomes a liability because you have 5 players who can shoot, and here's Hassan who's out on the wing and he gets blown by and he can't play out there. But my question is, if you think Hassan is a core piece on the other end, if there's a disadvantage on the defensive end with Hassan,
that's true.
why is he not a monster? If the other team is playing 5 small players, why is Hassan, who's supposed to be this dominant big man, if he's going to be a core piece, why is he not destroying them on the other end?
Save that thought. Save that thought because we're going to talk Hassan and more specifics. I want to get to the 3 guys that we're talking about and just to set it up. But that's a good thought. And John Crotty, who we talk about all the time, John is the guy that I do these Heat shows with, and John is the guy I defer to when it comes to knowledge on that stuff. He makes the same point you do as far as like what the advantage and disadvantage and how you use it. Okay, so we'll get back to Hassan in a moment. Number 2, Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry has said all the right things, Clay. He has done all the right things. He's gone out there and he's played, like I said, kind of the heart and soul of the Miami Dolphins through good, bad, and ugly. And unfortunately, there's been more bad and ugly in his years. But this week, his agent came out, spoke to the Miami Herald, let it be known, basically throwing Ryan Tannehill under the bus or Jay Cutler under the bus or whoever the quarterbacks of the Miami Dolphins are under the bus, saying, well, he is my client, a number 1 receiver like a Julio Jones, like an Antonio Brown, but, minus having the guy like Matt Ryan or Ben Roethlisberger throwing the football your way. It's a direct shot at Dolphins quarterbacks, even though he then said, oh, I'm not taking a shot at Dolphins quarterbacks. More importantly, when you hear that he wants number 1 receiver money for a slot guy who averages 9 yards a catch if lucky, to me, Dolphins aren't bringing him back. There's just no way. Unless he goes out of that market and sees, holy heck, there's no money to be made out there. Nobody's going to pay me. I've got to come back for something. And I can't imagine the Dolphins are going to franchise him at $16 million.
No, I almost look at this point as if he comes back to the Dolphins, it is going to be because he goes out there and does not get number 1 money elsewhere. And I know we're going to get into this more.
Who's going to give it to him?
I know we're going to get into this more, Will, but the fact that the agent comes out and says, oh, well, look at Julio Jones, he has Matt Ryan. Look at Antonio Brown, he has Ben Roethlisberger. Oh, but I'm not disrespecting the Dolphins quarterbacks.
Not at all.
Right now, do you know what Jarvis Landry's ultimate leverage is? It is the Dolphins because they are the most likely team out there to give him the money that he wants.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden, you've just crushed the leverage that he would have had going out to other teams.
Why make them mad? What's the point? What's the advantage?
None.
And this week shocked me because I think you both know that I'm a big supporter of Jarvis. I think we
all are.
I think we all like Jarvis and think that if the Dolphins can keep him, you should. But you're not going to pay him Antonio Brown money. You're not going to pay him Julio Jones money. I don't even know if you're going to pay him Devontae Adams money. I'm not exactly sure what you're going to pay him, but it's not going to be $15 million a year. Whatever the guarantees are. Look, his old college teammate, Odell Beckham, is getting a contract situation with the Giants. There's a guy who's going to get paid.
Yes.
There's a guy who's a difference maker to number 1. Jarvis is not that guy, but we're going to get more to Jarvis in a second. The final piece is Christian Yelich. Now, Christian is a guy that outside of South Florida, very few people know about. But again, he comes out and acts like he's a superstar this week, and through his agent, of course, because that's what players do. Say, okay, Mr. Agent, go out there and tell everybody, tell the world that I'm a great guy, but I don't want to be here. Request a trade. I mean, Dookie, when I look at it, I don't know who's left. I know that the Marlins would certainly trade Christian if they had the opportunity, like what you said about Hassan, if the offer was there. But Christian Yelich, really? You're going to go out there? You've hit, what, 290 in your career? You still haven't knocked in 100 runs. You've got a $50 million contract Jeffrey Loria gave you. Again, it could be a bargain deal if you turn out to be the player everyone thinks you're going to be. What are you doing?
My wife has a law degree, and she taught me a term: willingly, knowingly, and voluntarily. When Christian Yelich signed his contract with Jeffrey Loria, he did so willingly, knowingly, and voluntarily.
You mean sign the deal with the devil?
He made his agreement. He decided to sign a contract. And honestly, look, we're going to have to look for our joy watching this Marlins team wherever we can find it, in places we never thought we could look. There's a little part of me that hopes he stays, hopes he doesn't get
just so
traded,
he can be miserable
and
in that clubhouse?
And watch Christian Yelich earn every cent of the contract that he signed. He is not someone who went into
He's
this.
not Giancarlo Stanton, by the way.
He's also not someone who went into this blindly. He's seen the history of this franchise.
He made a deal with the devil.
He's a smart guy. He knew, look, I'm getting an opportunity. I'm getting a long-term contract. I'm getting good money. He took it. Now he's got to fulfill the rest of his contract.
All that said, and you're right, I agree with you. All that said, if the Marlins do get value for him, absolutely at this point with what they've already traded and considering they are in a rebuild. But my thing is, because he has a good contract from an owner's perspective and from a team perspective, and because he is still a young guy who has room to grow, to me, I like building around them because pretty much if you make a trade, you're hoping to get a Christian Yelich back. Sure, in a perfect world, you get a Mike Trout type player, Giancarlo Stanton type player. Doesn't always work that way, though. But if you got Christian Yelich type player who's a 19-year-old kid in Double-A now that becomes Christian Yelich, you're pretty happy in a couple of years.
The funny thing about all this, you say he's not Giancarlo Stanton, and he's not. I would bet you if they trade Christian Yelich, they get more in return for Yelich than they would for Giancarlo
because of the
money.
Contract, absolutely.
And the no trade clause.
And this goes back to the fact that Yelich, because of the contract that he willingly, voluntarily, and knowingly signed, there was risk on both sides for that. If you're the Marlins, you have him under team control back before he signed it. You had him under team control for a number of years. So you're giving him the money saying, we expect you to outperform
at 23 years old, 24 years old.
In arbitration. Now, the risk that you're running is that either A, he doesn't perform that well, or B, he gets injured. Well, he did outperform it, more so than he would like. Right now, he's a bargain, which is why if they try to put him on the open market, they'd get a lot in return. Last thing I'm going to say about this because I know we're going to move on. His agent also did him no favors from a PR perspective by coming out and saying this because of what you just said. You signed the deal.
You're a month from spring training. What is the leverage here? The Marlins can just say, you know what, Christian, screw you. We can trade you at any point. It might be the All-Star break, but you're going to play for us, and you're going to have to go out there and be the face of this franchise for as long as we keep you because we're paying you good money.
Could we call this podcast This Week in Bad Agents?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It feels like, look, I feel like Yelich's agent did him no favors from a PR perspective, and Landry's agent, frankly, I think what Landry's agent did may cost him financially because of the leverage that he took away from the Dolphins if the Dolphins ultimately decide, look, we can't have this in our locker room because of what he said about our quarterbacks.
And here's the thing. In Christian Yelich's case, I mean, let's be honest. Why do you have to come out in public to request a trade from the Marlins? They're trying to trade everybody. Yeah. Billy's on the market. They're trying. So you don't see Billy's agent coming out and saying, "Hey, we're trying to get a new mascot." Yeah, they're trying to trade. Look, Jeter's out there with Jimenez having private meetings about getting rid. Trust me, you don't need to come out in public and make your client look like an idiot. Just be quiet, and if they get a good deal, he gets his wish, and he doesn't look like a jerk. Okay, so we'll be back to that in a moment. Now let's start the more in-depth discussion on each. And I want to start with Hassan because, again, I want to go back to what Dookie said a little while ago. You bring up the Charlotte game where he played 0.2 of a second, which was basically the inbound pass at the end after the crazy comeback. I come back, though, to the game before where Hassan, who had come off a huge game in a victory, what did he have, 27, 13, and 6 in a win.
In Milwaukee.
Yes. Huge performance, that first big performance he's had since coming back from injury, like superstar type performance that you see him put together now and then. He then comes back and you almost have to play him, right, Clay? You almost have to say, okay, Hassan, you got to be there in the fourth in a close game. It doesn't work out so well the next night. Defensively, they get burned in Brooklyn. They have 3 baskets late. Yes, he could have gotten help, but Hassan looked lost defensively. The Nets went small. It burned Spo by staying with Hassan. You fault Hassan, but you fault Spo. It's just a decision you make as a coach. Fast forward now to the next game. Spo says, this ain't happening again. Now, part of it was he needed instant offense, and Kelly O provides that. Olynyk was out there, and he hit 3 big threes early, had 14 in the fourth, saved the Heat in Charlotte. Hassan never came back in, though, when it did get close, because Spo figured, I saw this movie last night. I've seen this movie before. So my question to you, Clay, is why is it that Hassan has to be a closer, right, if instead of just being a core guy who can give you a double-double at certain moments of the game? Do you have to be a closer to be considered a core guy?
No, I think you have to be a closer to be considered a superstar. You have to be a closer to be considered untradeable.
But he's not, though, right? He's not a superstar.
No.
Agree on that?
He's not even an all-star.
Well, but he'd have no all-stars at the moment.
But this is going back to how we started this whole thing, which these are 3 guys who are stars in South Florida, but their futures are uncertain because they are not national superstars. And I think if Hassan were someone that could go out there and dominate games at the end of ball games, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. And the reason for this is Hassan, for as great as he can be on the offensive end at times, he is not somebody who will dominate in the post. So if you have that team that's going to the smaller lineup down the stretch, right? The risk that you run of that is that opposing team is, okay, yes, we're going to have to pull him out on the outside because we're using our smaller, quicker guy, but we're risking Hassan dominating us underneath. Hassan has not, to this point in his career, dominated that offensive low post game. You're not going to see him with those Hakeem Olajuwon dream shakes, Shaq, where he was so nimble with his feet. You combine that with the strength and power that he would overpower anyone who was small. Hassan is not that type of half-court player to where he doesn't give you enough on the offensive end to justify having him getting beat on the defensive end late in ball games.
Yeah, but my thing with Hassan is that when you look at this team, you're right. You can't just say, okay, I can go small, leave Hassan, and force feed it in there. You're right. But my thing is, and you and I get in this discussion all the time, Duke. We do, and via text, and we go at it because why? To me, you don't treat Hassan any differently than anyone else.
No.
You play him when you have to and when it's to your advantage. There's only two guys on this team that I think warrant minutes all the time. It's not because they're superstars. It's because of what they do that's needed at all times. Goran, because he handles the ball, and he's literally the only ball handler the Heat have. He's the only true point guard. I know Walton's a kid that they brought up, but I mean, let's be honest here. Goran Dragic's the guy you want with the ball in his hands in key moments because he knows how to facilitate. That is his job. He's a ball handler. And number two is Jay Rich, because Jay Rich, on top of his offensive improvements since November, always plays defense, and he can always lock down or get on top of whoever that big scorer is. Even if he doesn't end up doing the job, he is their best defender in that situation. Why can't Hassan just be like Clay? Why can't it just be that way where Hassan he's sort of, yes, he's a star player and a core guy, but you're allowed to sit him in big moments because he doesn't give you his best in those big moments. His strengths aren't in those big moments.
So in the deciding moments of games, you don't trust this person to be on the floor because A, they're a liability on defense, and B, they're not imposing enough on offense. How is that a core you want to build around? What other superstar in any sport?
Isn't it working?
It's working in the regular season. It's working right now.
Guys, are we going to kid ourselves and think the Heat are a championship team?
Well, but the question is the word
treat them
core.
that way.
The question is the word core. Core means 4, 5, 6 years down the line. For this season, yeah, I think for this season, for this regular season, Eric Spoelstra's job is to win every night. And I think through our conversations, you have persuaded me that on a given night, he may not be the best answer. But my answer to that is, if he's not the best answer on many nights in the fourth quarter, then you have to look at his place in their future.
Well, Clay just said it. You started by saying that the Heat will listen. I think they should absolutely listen if something comes along because we all know the Heat are looking for a superstar. I mean, this isn't breaking news. This isn't making a prediction and not knowing what we're talking about. It's legitimately what they've tried to do the last 2 off seasons is get a superstar. They have failed to do it. Actually, 3 off seasons now. They've tried to do it. They haven't done it, and that's okay. They've tried their best. It hasn't worked out. It's tougher to get stars. We talk about it all the time. But Hassan is still a core guy. Meaning, if you do somehow get a superstar, whether if they sign a Gordon Hayward this offseason, right? Hassan's still here. Mm-hmm. He's still a building block. He's still a core guy, except now you've got your so-called go-to superstar guy undisputedly in Gordon Hayward.
Right.
Didn't happen. Okay, fine. But you could still have a superstar and still have Hassan. My thing is, to this team, their success, the way they're built now, is just every guy do your job. And when you're asked to do your job, whether it's 10 minutes here, 12 minutes there, sit out a fourth, play a fourth, you got to do it.
My question for you is this, Will. Do you think Hassan has reached his ceiling? Is this what he is? Or do you see him having growth? Because if he's going to grow, if he's going to be a better player than he is now, he has to be the type of player who can get on the floor in the fourth quarter.
And he has to earn it. He has to earn it. He earned it the other day, right? He earned it in Milwaukee. It didn't pay off in Brooklyn, but he earned that chance because of the monster night he had.
By the way, and mark this down, Dookie, because this is the core disagreement. We agree on a lot of things. This is the core disagreement and the argument that we've had a lot over the last 2 weeks. Full disclosure, we've talked a lot about Hassan Whiteside. This is the argument and the discussion. Dookie feels as though it is worth putting Hassan Whiteside out there in the fourth quarter to allow him to grow, even if you lose, because your ultimate ceiling is better if he reaches his ceiling.
So you're going to treat this like I don't want to say a rebuild expansion type team, but you're basically treating this like a team that is in it more for the long term than trying to win now.
You are trying to figure out what you have in Hassan Whiteside.
They know what they have. They know what they have.
And to get him.
They know what they have.
And just let me say this very quickly. There are two things going on here, right? There's belief and there's trust. And the more that a team trusts someone, the more belief that they have in a player, the more they're going to get out of them. If a player feels that there's no belief and feels there's no trust, it puts a ceiling on what they can do. When Hassan is sitting on the bench, you said it last week on the pod that he had kind of a Jay Cutler-like body language. If he's giving you bad body language and he's sitting out the last 17 minutes of a game, that's a major, major problem.
You saw what he did at the end of Charlotte, though. Sat out the entire fourth quarter. He was the first one to go and hug and pick up Bam and celebrate with the guys at the end. I will say this from being around that locker room enough, and I hope, Clay, you go in there post games and you go to practices sometimes and you see that this is a very close unit, very close team. Are they a championship team again? No. This is not the Warriors we're talking about. We get it. But they're a team that really cares about each other. I don't think Hassan is a bad teammate. I don't think he's any kind of locker room issue. I don't think anybody on that organization dislikes Hassan. I just think they want more from him, and they're trying to get it. Quickly before we move to Jarvis, I'll go down the row with each. Is Hassan Whiteside a member of the Miami Heat at the end of this season?
I say yes, because I don't think that they get what they want in return.
I agree with that.
I agree too. So I think for all the discussion that fans and people ask us all the time on Twitter and social media, and every time Hassan has a bad fourth quarter or doesn't play, you and I are all texting each other like crazy, and fans are tweeting and everybody's screaming. I don't think the Heat are screaming at all. I think the Heat are just trying to help Hassan get better and trying to win games, and they've been doing it well entering this new week, winners of 9 of their last 11. Okay, now we go to Jarvis. Jarvis Landry's in an interesting situation, and Clay, you touched on it a little bit earlier. I don't see a team out there, and I include the Miami Dolphins in that, giving him number one receiver money. What's number one receiver money? What, 14, 15 mil a year?
Yeah, right about there. And I think, again, the problem that you're running into right now is if there is no market elsewhere, then why are the Dolphins going to overpay? And I ask this question with a question. Do you think that Bill Belichick stays up at nights worrying about Jarvis Landry?
No, and that's the thing too. Is where do we all have made it clear we like Jarvis a lot. I do, and not only as a person, as a teammate. I think he's a fiery guy. I know he does some dumb things sometimes, but I think it comes from a good place. I think it comes from heart and competitiveness. But I'm sorry, we've seen enough of Jarvis now to know he is not that game breaker. He can't take a game over like Antonio Brown can. He can't do what Odell Beckham Jr. does. I mean, he can't do it a lot of times what a Des Bryant does when he's healthy and he's fine. I mean, you're talking about the upper tier wide receivers. I just mentioned the best. I'm talking about even the second tier of so-called number one receivers. He is a slot receiver who is nifty. He can make moves. He finds ways to get open. He can get you that tough first down. He's a competitor. But come on, he is not a number one wide receiver. And that's not an insult.
Clay, you asked us to be us on
Yeah,
this
yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
So I will debut publicly a nickname for Jarvis Landry, which his agent may not like. Slowdell Beckham. How do you catch 112 footballs?
Well, I call him Odell Beckham Jr.
The 112 footballs and not get 1,000 yards. That is very hard to do.
Impossible.
And so listen, it's funny because I feel like last year when they made the playoffs, I used to tweet 53 more Jarvis Landrys, heart and soul of the team. I wish everyone would play as hard as him.
I love the way he plays.
Last game of the season, and Clay, you could probably touch on this. You're around Adam Gase. When you heard Adam Gase in the end of the season news conference address Jarvis Landry and address him and Kenyon Drake getting kicked out of a game because Jarvis's fiery nature and his under 1,000 yards turned into a brawl that cost them their two best offensive players in that game. How do you think Adam Gase felt about that?
I'm glad he said that because I think his agent's response may have been a response to Gase's response.
I think it may have been. I thought it was very interesting how quickly the narrative turned from how Gase spoke about Jarvis Landry.
Boy, it's changed fast, hasn't it?
Do you remember the last player that the narrative changed very quickly like that about somebody who he called a hothead?
Jay Ajayi.
Jay Ajayi, who was on his way to the Super Bowl, by the way, right now.
Whatever.
So I don't think it is a coincidence that you saw the narrative from the head coach of the Dolphins change like that from a player that he just traded and a player who may well be on his way out the door. Because I think you went from the day of the game, and I forgot Gase's exact words, but he said, "I know what Landry did. I don't want to talk about it." Mm-hmm. And then the next day, or whenever the exit interviews were, maybe it was the next day. It was the worst that I have ever seen.
Yeah, he changed the narrative quick.
Very
quickly.
It
was a message he sent. His agent, meaning Jarvis's agent, obviously fought back with his comments. That was a way to kind of fight back. I look at it this way too. There's a bigger picture here with Jarvis. How long have we been having the will the Dolphins keep Jarvis discussion? This is a couple of years already, hasn't it been? Because usually when the guy's a year away from free agency is when you start to have that discussion. I remember you and I on Sports Sunday having this discussion on set. And the reality is this: if they haven't signed him to this point or really made a true effort to make it clear that they're going to build around him, like for the Giants, for instance, their new GM that they just hired with Odell Beckham and the Mara family. Every time they're asked about Odell Beckham, he's not going anywhere.
Right.
I mean, Odell Beckham is going nowhere. That's how you treat a superstar receiver. I haven't heard that about Jarvis Landry. I've heard of we'd like to keep him, we love Jarvis, he plays hard. I haven't heard anyone say he's not going anywhere. That's the way you keep a guy. He's not going anywhere. He's our core guy. I mean, he came out, Adam Gase came out and said, Ryan Tannehill, who's coming off major knee surgery and hasn't played in a year, is my quarterback. But he won't say that about Jarvis Landry coming into a free agent year where you could just franchise him and keep him. If he's that important, franchise and keep him and just say he's going to stay one way or the other. Hopefully it's a long-term deal. If not, we're going to keep him. And he doesn't. And I know there's some leverage issues there, but the reality is if he's really your number one guy, you treat him like a number one guy.
You know, Clay, you mentioned Bill Belichick. Do you think Belichick can even name his receivers? Does it matter to him? 82, 80, 86, 84. There's an interchangeable nature to the New England Patriots system, to the wide receivers. Jarvis Landry, he scored more touchdowns this year. He brings that energy.
He was good. He was very good.
He was good. He caught 112 footballs. Nobody else in the NFL caught more footballs. But impact. Impacting a game, like you said.
And if Matt Ryan's throwing the ball, or Ben Roethlisberger's throwing the ball, or Tom Brady's throwing the ball, I don't know how he gets more yards per carry. I mean, in Jarvis's case, this is what he is. He's a slot guy who's going to run 5-6 yard routes. If Jarvis runs 15-yard routes, I mean, is he really going to be significantly better? I don't think that's his game. I guess if the offensive line gives the quarterback time, maybe you could find it on the field more. I know there's a trickle-down effect, but I don't see Jarvis as being a game breaker, get you 15, 18 yards a catch. That's not who he is, and that's okay. He's still very good from what he really is.
Here's the distinction I want to make, and I think this applies to all three players to some extent. I think a lot of the debate, the discussion, the argument is debate over terms and how we're categorizing these players, right? So when I say that Jarvis Landry doesn't keep Bill Belichick up at night, Jarvis Landry is a very, very good player. He is a great possession receiver. Bill Belichick does not go to Matt Patricia and say, we're going to alter our defense this week to stop him. When they play the New Orleans Saints in a few years, they will say, we will alter our defense to stop Alvin Kamara. When they play the New York Giants, we will alter our defense to stop Odell Beckham. You do that for a number one receiver. You do not do that for Jarvis Landry.
Why do we sound like a bunch of men who are saying that the girl has a really nice personality?
That's what it is. That's what it is.
That's why do I feel that's where we're going? All right, so I asked it for Hassan. I'll ask it for Jarvis. This was probably a little tougher than Hassan, where we all agreed. Is Jarvis Landry in a Miami Dolphins uniform next season?
No.
Doogie?
Well, after calling him slowed out, I hope not. No. I think, I think his agent has to talk him up. The Dolphins have to talk him down. That's how negotiations work. Can they meet in the middle? It's that moment of clarity. It's him going around the league and seeing he's not going to get that kind of money. Okay, maybe the best situation is here.
You're saying a lot. What's the
say all that
yes
to say yes.
You think he'll be back?
Yes.
I'm going to say yes, and here's why. Similar to what you just said. I'm with Clay. I think it's no if he truly thinks he's going to go number one money, and that's what he's chasing. The Dolphins just move on from him. I think Jarvis is going to get hit hard with the reality that he may think he's the number one receiver, and his agent may say he's the number one receiver, but the NFL is not going to pay him like a number one receiver. And I think he'll stay in Miami at a good contract, get a nice for both, and I think it'll be a good thing for the Dolphins to keep him near, because I still think, we talk core Hassan, I still think Jarvis Landry is part of the core of the Miami Dolphins and can be successful.
And that's the only way I see him coming back. And again, as I said before, it's where the agent coming in and saying what he did, the Dolphins may look at it and say, we don't want that situation in our locker room.
Yeah, it could also be that it's past the point of no return, which leads us to the final so-called star, and that's Christian Yelich, who is an all-star, and he's a guy that's very talented. And he's a very good player, maybe not known nationally because he's played for the Marlins in front of crowds of 15,000, 16,000, and it's going to be a lot less this year if he stays. But when you look at what Yelich is doing now, can this be repaired? Can it be fixed? And do the Marlins even want to fix it? You think right now, my take, Clay, is I think Derek Jeter is looking at the situation and talking to Mike Hill and saying, Mike, trade the guy. Give me a good offer. He's a good young player with a solid contract. I don't need this guy around. He's not Giancarlo Stanton. He's not Mike Trout. He's not a superstar. He's not Jose Altuve. He's a good baseball player with a good contract who can get you 20 homers and 100 ribbies and hit 290. Great. Let's go get me a couple of those in a deal for the future, and let's move on.
My take is, I think this is a nothing to them. I think this is a, so what? I don't care if you're happy or not. Good for you. Because, look, Yelich's agent may be saying he doesn't want to be there, and I'm sure he doesn't. Yelich is not going to show up to spring training and start hiding people's underwear or being a problem in the clubhouse,
being
right?
more miserable than he already has been, by the way.
Seriously.
Because let's be honest, if we're going to be, you said about being ourselves, let's be honest. I personally do not have a problem with Christian Yelich. I've interviewed him numerous times, have you Clay, and he, at times he could be a friendly guy, but that clubhouse was very toxic, and a big reason why was Jeffrey Loria and the atmosphere Loria created that everybody hated being there. But okay, so if you signed a deal with a guy who was compared favorably in South Florida to Fidel Castro, and then you played under him, and you were miserable under him, and then he's gone, and then the new team wants to rebuild, and you're still miserable, maybe you should start looking in the mirror and seeing who the miserable person is. Because if you can't play in any situation, when are you going to play? It has to be for a winner with the Yankees and Red Sox? That's the only way you're going to play baseball?
Well, and I think that's what obviously his agent is trying to do, and his agent is trying to be the bad guy
he wants
here.
to go be in San Fran or in St. Louis or in a great baseball town. I get it.
Fans don't care. Fans don't look at this and say, oh, well, the agent is so mean here. But Christian Yelich doesn't really feel this way. No, the agent is speaking for the player in this case. And again, it's not going to cost him dollars, at least not now. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but it's going to cost him PR-wise because unlike with Giancarlo Stanton, who we knew the Marlins had to move, unlike with D. Gordon, Marcell Ozuna, where contract structure told you they have to move these guys. You said it earlier, Christian Yelich is a player that you want to build around.
Yeah.
So if you're Derek Jeter right now, you may say that he's unhappy. I don't think he cares. I think he says, look, so what? If
He's
another
got
team
zero leverage.
Zero leverage. If a team calls and blows Mike Hill and Derek Jeter away, then you take it. But I don't think you just trade him for the sake of trading him.
I actually think by saying he wants to be traded, he makes himself less likely to be traded.
I agree.
I think the Marlins are sitting there, and they are trying their damnedest to trade everyone. Anyone who's making money. JT Realmuto said he wanted to trade. He doesn't need to say it. These guys don't need to say it. If Yelich comes out all fiery, his agent making a big statement, Derek Jeter's going, you know what? Keep that guy. Get rid of everybody else. Keep that guy. You know why? Spite. And I would not put it past any ownership group to say, we have a contract with this guy. He's being difficult. Let's make him live it out.
I get it, but I don't think Derek Jeter's going to build the Marlins with spite. But I do think this. I think Christian Yelich, he may say in a way similar to what you're hinting, is like, you know what, Christian? We're not going to trade you right now. We probably will eventually, but we're going to hold out.
Make him sweat.
Do me a favor. Go out there and hit the damn baseball and and earn your $50 million contract. Hit the ball, play well, and you know what? By the All-Star break, when teams are desperate for that extra bat in the lineup to get them over the top, then I'll trade you and I'll get the most return, and then you can go say how you hated being with the Marlins and live your life for a winner. But you're not going to tell me how to trade you, when to trade you. You're going to collect your check. You're going to play baseball, play it well the way you can, and then I'll work on it. I think that may happen.
Imagine if, every now and again, if there's a lot of news, one of our sportscasts has to be a casualty of it, whether 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock every now and again.
You mean every day?
Every now and again that happens. What would happen if you busted into the news director's office, kicked down the door, and said, my sportscast at 4 had to live? You think that would play over well?
It would not go well, and certainly if I made it public in front of everyone. And I understand that these are different circumstances. These are high-paid millionaires. They have a lot of – look, there's a funny thing I thought of the other day, and that's about 4 or 5 different people tweeted at me that Justin Bohr is not complaining, and he's a true, player, professional. But what's the difference between Justin Bohr and Christian Yelich? Justin Bohr doesn't have his money yet. Christian Yelich does. Money is the ruler. What does every situation we're talking about have in common? Hassan's got a $98 million contract. Jarvis wants a big contract. Yelich has got his contract. Money rules all this discussion. If Christian Yelich doesn't have that contract, he is not requesting a trade. He's being quiet. He's going to be the team player and say, hey, I just got to go out and play hard, help this team win, see what we can do. I know we're going to struggle, but we're going to play hard, like Justin Bohr is saying. Why? Because Justin Bohr makes $500,000 a year, whatever he's going to make in arbitration, now more than that. Well, but Christian Yelich has got his $50 million guaranteed contract. He could say this. All right, so as we've done with the first two, let's finish it off with Yelich. Clay, is Christian Yelich in a Marlins uniform a month from now in spring training?
Yes If you ask me the question about the trade deadline, my answer is no. I think he is on the team in spring training. I think they deal him, as you said, when a team gets desperate for a bat.
I think, yeah, I'm going to go with that one. I don't think he finishes the year in a Marlins uniform. I think there's a good chance he starts the year. It wouldn't shock me if he didn't. But, yeah, but here's the thing. I think even if he doesn't complain to his agent and his agent comes out in public, I still would have said that 2 weeks ago before all this started.
Potentially.
Because I think the Marlins have been trying to trade him anyways, which is why I didn't understand the point of the demand when just shut up. You're going to get traded at some point and get your wish. Dookie?
Man, I hope he's here.
You just want to be here for coverage-wise. Every day, go get Christian Yelich sound.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, the Marlins are, they're on an 18-game losing streak. I think we should do a one-on-one with Yelich.
See what Yelich has to say.
Yeah.
He's going to be yelling a little bit. Okay, so there you go. Those are the 3 superstars, 3 futures, 3 conversations. Before we move on, though, when we go and we wrap up this Miami Sports Pod Week 2, we're going to take some questions via social media that came to Clay and myself on Twitter. We have a gentleman here, Patriot of the Week is his Twitter handle name, which is, gosh, do I have to ask a question from a Patriot?
Well, he's a Canes fan and you're a grad, so there you go.
Oh, there you go. Okay, I like you then. Though it is the offseason, I'd like to hear your takes on how many years away the Canes are from beating Bama and Clemson. I'll start off by saying 2. I don't think this is the year they're ready, but I think in 2 years, I think with another recruiting class in place, with whatever quarterback, whoever ends up starting this year, getting a year under their belt, I don't think it's going to be Malik Rozier. I think the following season, this team is ready to be a top 2 or 3 team that can possibly win the ACC. I do believe, though, this team will be playing for an ACC title again next year. I do believe that. But I'm just not sure they're ready to beat a Clemson with a Kelly Bryant and then go on and face an Alabama in a title-type game.
Yeah, in a one-game scenario, I think 2 years is fine. I think we're starting to see Alabama and Clemson, and maybe Ohio State to a certain extent, kind of separate from the rest of college football. I think you're going to have the next decade where those 3 programs, maybe decade is too long, but
5 years.
5 to 10 years, somewhere in that window where those 3 programs are kind of starting to separate because of resources, talent, coaching. And I think the Canes, though, they will be in 2 to 3 years one of those teams that annually can challenge.
They are in the next, and look, they are in the next grouping, I think, Dookie, because if you look at the preseason polls, which mean absolutely nothing because the season is still months away, but most people have the Canes between 7-8 and 10-11, which means they're the second tier after the elite teams, and that's not a bad place to be for a team that a couple of years ago still had Al Golden as a head coach.
Did you see Nick Saban's helicopter that flew in this week?
He's going to get all the St. Thomas kids. He's going to be landing in these choppers.
So I think Clay's right, and I actually think his 10 years was probably it's when Saban's run stops.
Just like Belichick.
The same way, right? When Belichick,
yes.
when
Belichick
the Dolphins
and Brady are gone, that's when the Dolphins are good again.
And and so I think college, when the Warriors are done, the rest of the NBA can get involved. When Belichick's done, the rest of the NFL can have hope, and when Saban's done, college football will have hope.
But the question was how many years away from beating Bama and Clemson? I would say 2 from possibly beating Clemson. I think in a couple of years with the right recruiting, they can maybe beat a Clemson in a title game. In an ACC title game, beating Bama probably closer to 4 or 5. It's going to be a while.
One game scenario versus
Nick Saban might be gone by
Saban
then.
with 2 weeks to prepare, a little bit different.
Eric Camacho via Twitter. Eric's Bulls and Miami Heat have been great over the past 82 games. Which is the greater accomplishment, the second half of last season or the first half of this season? Doogie?
Wow, that's interesting. I would kind of have to say this season, just because there was a little bit of the element of surprise.
They're not
last
fooling
year.
anybody this year.
It looks like this is not an accident. Whereas last year, they won a bunch of games kind of late in the season where Deion Waiters is hitting shots against Golden State, and you're seeing these where you might go, well, it's kind of a fluke. Maybe they're playing a little harder. They've been doing it over a long enough stretch where you have to give it more credibility.
Last year was unprecedented. It never happened before what they did, so I would say last year was probably more impressive, but I think it is very impressive that now that they don't take anyone by surprise, they're kind of doing the same thing again. I mean, the last month and a half, they have been that 30-11 team. I just mentioned earlier, they'd won 9-11 entering the new week. This is very impressive what they've done. So to answer the question, I would say probably last year, but it's still impressive what they've done this year.
Did they make the playoffs last year?
No.
Bottom line me, baby. I'm Pat Riley. I'm not all warm and fuzzy. This year, they're in the playoff hunt. I'm a lot more impressed with what they're doing this year. For that reason, plus what Dookie said, that it shows that it is now sustained.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. I don't think there's any question. We talked about it last week when we talked about the Heat. 54 wins in 82 games. That is a top 5 NBA team over the course of an entire season. That's not a fluke. That's not a fluke. Which leads us to the final question. David Stone via Twitter says, should the Heat stand pat or make a trade at the deadline? I am going to start this off by saying I don't know if they should stand pat, but I think they will because I just don't know what's really out there. You talked earlier about trading Hassan. What are the assets? The Heat don't have draft picks that are accessible, first-round picks, which teams love now, trying to collect picks and get guys for the future. When a team is tanking, you want picks, not players. I don't know what the Heat can realistically give. Could they make a minor fringe deal to maybe get a backup point guard, do something like that? Yeah, there could be. But given that their core is so similar, meaning it's like 7 or 8 guys that are just as important as the other guy throughout the course of the game, I don't know how you select one guy and say, okay, we're going to trade for this. And the reality is, Clay, I mean, if you're going to make a trade, you're probably going to do it for a superstar. How are you going to get a DeMarcus Cousins, if he's even available, or a player of that stature? Damian Lillard, there's been rumors that Portland may look to break up the McCollum-Lillard duo if they struggle, which right now they're like a 7 or 8 seed in the West. How do you get a player like that?
Well, and that's where we go back to the distinction between core player and superstar. If you're just rearranging core players, then no, you don't make a deal just for the sake of making a deal because you've got the chemistry built up with this team, which, by the way, it actually took a few weeks to get it back from last year. I think now they're starting to hit their stride. If a superstar becomes available, one of those so-called untradeable players that just happens to want to force his way,
that Riley hates to talk about now, but he certainly mentioned a few years ago.
Like a Kyrie Irving? I'm sorry. I mean, that was one, and we discussed this. That I was always of the mindset that if I'm Pat Riley, I would have called the Cavs and said, name your price.
I would think that maybe he did behind the scenes, and I think Pat has done it. But the reality is the problem is the Heat don't have the price that they have their bank account for players and what it means to other teams.
Yes.
As good as the Heat are as a team, the assets when picked apart aren't that great as far as when you're chasing a superstar because the NBA is now built around not give me equal money and equal decent players. It's about give me draft picks where I can go out and build a team after I tank and get some young guys. Look, other teams have done it, hasn't worked. Other teams are trying to do it as we speak. Heat don't have those kind of assets. They have the kind of assets that can help a contender. But that contender's not going to give up a superstar.
Yeah, so to answer the question, I'm not warm and fuzzy. I trade guys if I can get a superstar in return and potentially build for the future. Otherwise, you stand pat.
Do you agree?
Buy low, sell high. I think because of the collective nature of the way they're playing, I don't think they're showcasing any of their assets to where they're peak value. I think, for example, if you're going to trade Hassan right now, when he's playing 0.2 seconds in the fourth quarter, you're probably not going to get the type of value that you can. For that reason, because this is a team that's just a team, that's a collective, that's not individual parts. I think, are you going to give up on Justice Winslow now? Would be getting rid of Justice Winslow now be selling high?
Yeah, you do Hassan, Jay Rich, Tyler. What are you looking to move?
Let these assets become what they can become. That is when you make a move. I don't think they have it right now. I think they stand pat.
Final thought, too, why I think they stand pat and why I think that's been the plan all along. Again, unless they get blown away, which I just don't see that happening if they can get a Cousins or something, is I think Pat Riley, his home run time to change this team is the offseason. He's tried it, again, 2 or 3 off seasons in a row. It hasn't worked out. I think right now, he's like, okay, I brought this team back. Let's see what they got. So far, what they got is good enough for 4th in the Eastern Conference in the middle of the race. Cleveland's down this year. Toronto's always a question come playoff time. All the other teams behind the Heat are all, they're kind of middle of the pack. They're good, bad. Boston's the only team you look at in the East and say to yourself, okay, that's a good team right there. So if you're the Heat and you say to myself, if I could sneak into the playoffs as a 4 seed and maybe win a round and have a chance at a Boston or Cleveland in the second round, what am I changing up?
Right.
Let me just give it a shot that way with the roster I have. And then in the offseason, we'll figure out again if we can get the home run and get the superstar.
Let me answer one more before we get out of here because this is something that I've seen a lot of fans asking about because we've had a number of Miami Hurricanes players that have left early. Nelson Rodriguez on Twitter asks, why do Clemson players return and Miami players leave? And I want to answer that because this is something that you're seeing a lot in college football. In fact, this year, 106 early entrants into the NFL draft. It's a new record. You're seeing more players going early. My feeling is it's because we're having a brand new discussion about head injuries, things like that, so players want to get the money when they can. They're protecting themselves, which I have no problem with, by the way. Skip the bowl games, go and get your money when you can. So to answer Nelson, this is happening everywhere. I think you just look at the Clemson situation as a unique situation as opposed to the Miami situation being bad for Miami. It's just happening everywhere than Clemson.
Let's just say what we're all thinking. They don't want to take a pay cut by going to the NFL.
Oh, stop it.
right?
Stop it.
Come on.
You're
That's
gonna
what we're all
end
thinking.
with
That's what
that
Nelson's
one.
getting.
That's not what I was thinking.
That's
What
what
I'm
you're
thinking is
thinking.
this.
We know it.
When you go to a place like a Clemson or Alabama, you go for the college experience. You go for the winning 2 or 3 national championships. When you come to Miami, you come to Miami because you want to be part of that swag and that team, and you want to be in the NFL. It's a big reason why they have about as many NFL players in the last 20 years as anybody. So I think there's a difference about coming the big-time feel of coming to a city like Miami, which, let's face it, isn't a college town. You don't have that college experience. But I do feel that in the end, those small towns are going to have a little bit of an advantage over Miami.
Can we get a booing sound effect in here for whenever Dookie makes a point that...
Or a bad joke.
No, I save those for the emails we get about things later.
Listen, let me just tell you something. I will say this. I don't know how long the Miami Sports Pod will continue, but the 2 weeks you were on it were great.
Thank you. It was an honor
and
and a privilege.
We apologize for the rest, and we look forward to chatting next week. We'll see topics to be determined. Super Bowl is the Eagles and the Patriots, so I probably will be in hibernation somewhere trying to not think about that. And we'll return to the Miami Sports Pod next week. Thanks for listening.